I think my best writing experiences came out of a lot of work that I had to do in some of my creative writing classes. And I had this one teacher, and she was very into literary fiction. And she believed that we had to have some kind of exciting moment to happen in the story, or it wasn't something that should be classified as a short story. So the entire class, we were not allowed to write about anything with science fiction, fantasy, anything. It had to be realistic fiction only, and you had to have a character who developed in some way through some sort of dramatic um, moment in their life. And it was very frustrating for everyone in the class because when we thought about creative writing, we thought that we could write in other genres, but she shut that down pretty quickly. I wrote this one story about the East Carolinian squirrels. And they were kind of rampant on campus and wild, and they would come up to you. And I felt like this one squirrel was like a bad omen for me because every time it, made this terrible noise as I walked
You
by,
could identify one squirrel.
I could identify this one squirrel. It was sitting up in this tree. It was like a horror movie type thing. And so I would walk by, it was make this terrible sound. Actually made me look into the different varieties of squirrels on campus because I was like, what is with this squirrel?
Hmm.
And then I went and had a chemistry class and ended up getting terrible grade. And it happened 2 times in a row. So I just tried to kind of stay away from that area when I was walking on campus. Um, but anyways, so included this story about this man who was a writer in his home, and he had this basically like clear ceiling that he could monitor the wildlife around his home. And I talked about these squirrels. But she did not like the direction that I took this story. However, once I actually wrote the story, we had to pass them around and share them, and everyone in the class started writing about squirrels from that point on. So I felt like she was pretty irritated that I
Started
started the whole
squirrel
trend.
revolution.
Yeah. And at one point, there was a person in the class that was talking about a serial killer, and they had dissected this squirrel, and it just became this thing that everyone talked about.
Was your squirrel story told like from with squirrels with thoughts and voices, or was it just they were?
They were just a part of it.
Uh-huh.
He was just studying the squirrels, and I later found articles about universities that were actually researching squirrel behavior with like robotics and various things, and that their calls actually did mean different things. And it was kind of interesting because I wouldn't have looked into it otherwise. But so I was kind of frustrated at the end of this class because I felt like everyone in there, she was not very satisfied with any of the stories that we came up with. And I was thinking, well, this is what, creative writing's about. Maybe it's not something that I really want to pursue. But I kind of gave it a shot. I saw there was a Writer's Digest contest, and from there, I decided to try out an actual fantasy piece for young adults. And I essentially wrote about this girl, and she was kind of walking through nature, and she almost taps into this like fae like ability. And it had to be a certain number of words. I think it was something like 1,800. It had to fit all the constraints. And if you won, you would get to speak with an agent, go to New York, and all of these things. And I didn't win, but I got an honorable mention. And so,
Awesome.
so it gave me hope that maybe I could write, creative writing aside from just, professional writing. And I feel like even the piece I brought today is a piece of creative writing. And I think it's a lot harder to really um, submit that for evaluation from people around you because everyone brings in their ideas of what a specific piece of creative writing should look like. And whether you have strong character development or plot analysis and all of these things, or if you have, a good central theme. And I think with the actual like professional writing, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is the standard everyone expects to see. So you can kind of make it match that, situation. But with a creative writing, it can be anything, and it could follow trends. It could just be what's popular at the time, and you just never really know what's how someone's going to respond to it. And then if you think you've done a phenomenal job, and then someone tells you, well, it's terrible, and you have to redo all this stuff, like how do you take that internally and go from it? So I don't know. I think that's about it.
Okay. Can I ask you a couple of questions about what you were saying?
Sure.
The last thing you were saying, you said something about creative writing conventions and how they're a bit mystifying. What are the things that you think about creative writing that's like the stronger parts about it that you don't make it, even though it's hard to revise? I see what you're saying. Like you can anticipate it's a hard piece to revise. What would you say is like the stronger parts of that you enjoy more?
I like being able to describe settings, and I like being able to create characters in a reality that's not necessarily our own. And so for me, it kind of gives you that escape from day to day life. Um, and I think also it has the appeal that if you become good enough, you could actually make some money doing this. You might get a book published, and people might actually know who you are as a writer. Whereas with if you write, even something like an English journal, maybe a handful of scholarly people have read it, but you don't really have that fame. And especially with young adult writing now, that's what all the movies are made about. Obviously, it's going to be very difficult still to even get noticed, but I feel like it's worth a try.
Good. Did you want me to ask you any other questions? Or?
I think that's good.